You're watching News Now, and right now happening now, we'll bring you some updates as regards what's happening between the U.S. and Venezuela. Now, relations between the United States and Venezuela have been tense for more than a decade, shaped by political disagreements, economic sanctions, and deep ideological divides. Now, Washington has repeatedly accused the Caracas of democratic backsliding, human rights abuses, and corruption, while Venezuela has described U.S. actions as interference in its internal affairs. At the center of the dispute between the President, at the center of everything, of the whole dispute rather, President Nicolas Maduro, whose leadership has been rejected by the United States and several of its allies following elections they described as neither free nor fair. Despite this non-recognition, Maduro has remained firmly in control of Venezuela's state institutions and military, maintaining power amid severe economic challenges. The U.S. response has largely focused on economic pressure, imposing wide-ranging sanctions, particularly on Venezuela's oil industry, which is the country's main source of revenue. These measures have significantly weakened the Venezuelan economy, but have failed to dislodge Maduro from office. Now, in recent months, tensions escalated beyond economic measures, with the United States increasing its naval and aerial presence in the Caribbean. American officials framed these deployments as part of counter-narcotics and regional security operations, accusing Venezuela of being a transit hub for illegal drugs bound for the United States. Just days before his capture, President Maduro appeared to seek a diplomatic opening, publicly offering cooperation with Washington on drug trafficking and illegal migration. That overture suggested the possibility of renewed engagement, even as military pressure continued to build in the region. The confirmed capture of a sitting head of state marks a significant departure from established diplomatic norms. Traditionally, international disputes involving leaders are addressed through negotiations, sanctions, or international judicial processes rather than direct military intervention. This development has now triggered intense global debate over sovereignty, international law, and the balance of power in world affairs, raising concerns about whether unilateral action by powerful states could redefine the rules of diplomacy in the years ahead. My name is Chiwata Onyema. I'm going to be having conversations around the feud between the U.S. and Venezuela. Joining me to discuss this is global affairs analyst Alexander von Rugen. Thank you, Alexander, once again for joining us. Now, I'd like to know or hear from your point of view, with a sitting president captured by foreign power, does this constitute a direct violation of Venezuela's sovereignty under international law?
Under international law, yes. But if you see what the U.S. has done to build up to this point, it's not been a sudden reaction. Maduro was indicted in 2020 as a narco-terrorist. The government placed a reward on his head, a bounty of $50 million. One of the last actions Trump did when he was in his last term. It's interesting because after Trump was defeated by Biden, you didn't hear much about it. The Biden administration seemed to let things be as they were. And now with Trump back in power, there's been a rekindled interest because he has the power to do so. So as far as breaking international law, I think he's bending it. America's done this in the past. They've arrested the president of Panama back in 1990, Noriega, ironically for the same type of charges, narco-terrorism. But to build up to that point, they had an arsenal of evidence and basically whistleblowers from the country to corroborate the charges. And I'm sure America has it in this particular case because there's been incidences where key personnel in Maduro's regime have been recently extracted from Spain. Caraval was his former security head. He was brought to America this summer, and he's pled guilty. And with a guilty plea in American courts, that means basically singing like a canary, giving as much information as possible to get clemency on his sentences. There's been other narco traffickers, main high-ranking ones. El Chapo, his sons. El Chapo's in jail forever. His sons have both been indicted. They've both pled guilty. And if they have knowledge of the conduit through Venezuela, I'm sure they will have spoken as well. Most interestingly, a Puerto Rican by the name of Junior Capsula, which was his nickname, Jose Figueroa Augusto, had been sentenced to 200 years in prison. He cut a plea deal in 2020. He was the main conduit from Venezuela to Dominican Republic and then into Puerto Rico. The guy was an unsavory character, many murders, extortion, drug dealing, human trafficking, you name it, to get a sentence of over 200 years. Suddenly, he's walking free. There's only a few departments in the U.S. government that can take that kind of sentence and release him. Now, ironically, his release came in 2020, which didn't feed into the Trump's regime's plan of what they're exercising now. But I'm sure he gave much detailed evidence as to where the labs were, where the conduits are, the parties in the government involved, which many have stayed in power in Venezuela from 2020 till now.
All right, thank you so much, Alex, for your analysis on that. I'm going to come to you with more questions, but right now we're being joined by global policy analyst Yemi Fajemising. Thank you so much, Mr. Fajemising, for joining us. I'd like to know, with what has happened, what the United States has done to Venezuela, does this action establish a precedent where powerful nations can unilaterally remove foreign leaders without international authorization?
Yeah, a lot of events are unfolding as we speak, and I think quite a lot of people are looking at the fact that we could be opening a Pandora box here. So we need to understand one thing about the Trump administration. It's an administration that is focused on winning at the moment without really thinking things strategically. So winning at the moment means, okay, they may have seen that they've won by capturing or kidnapping Maduro now. So what does that mean in terms of international law? A lot of the Western countries now, they're scrambling to even respond because they all agree it's illegal. So what are we going to see in future? Are we going to be seeing China taking Taiwan? Are we going to be seeing Vladimir Putin even expanding his war campaign across Europe? So there's a lot of dynamics here, which is a bad precedent, so to say, when it comes to countries invading or capturing or even kidnapping head of states. This is a clear violation of UN Charter. So I think we're going to be seeing more things in coming hours, coming weeks, as it stands now. Even the European Union, they're struggling to respond to the whole thing.
All right, let me still stay with you, Yemi, on this one. Now, how does international law treat the arrest of a sitting head of state outside, recognized judicial frameworks?
Yeah, we know with the UN Charter, it clearly states that it's a clear violation of international laws. So there's no question about that. So we're going to be asking the question, how is the UN going to respond? Obviously, they will be responding by issuing statements and maybe calling on a meeting. But is anything going to come out of it? It's very unlikely. But if anything's going to come out of it, the United States is an important member, and they're probably going to veto any kind of resolution that comes out of it. So it's a dicey situation, which we also need to think about the implication when it comes to oil prices. At the moment, the oil prices are about $60 a barrel. So maybe we don't know what the market is how the market is going to react from next week in terms of oil price. We also don't know. China buys a lot of Venezuelan oil. We also don't know if China is going to carry on buying the oil, or who China is going to be paying, because there's a power vacuum now in Venezuela. Who's going to be in charge? So there's no uncertainties here that maybe next week, coming weeks, coming hours will shed more light on.
All right, let me come back to you, Alexander. Looking at the fact that the United States never accepted Maduro as the leader or the president of Venezuela. I just want to know, does non-recognition of a government provide legal grounds for a forceful removal of its leader?
Well, it's a loophole. And by the way, it was not just the U.S., it was the European community that delegitimized the election in 2024. They recognized Eduardo Gonzalez as the legitimate leader of Venezuela. He never took control because he had to flee the country. Now, as of late, the Machado, who won the Nobel Peace Prize, won 90% of the opposition party vote. So in effect, she'd be the candidate for the opposition today. This process has been in the works for a while. When she accepted the Nobel Peace Prize in August, she accepted it on behalf of President Trump, even though she got the award. So there was negotiations that have been going on there for some time. It's been a culmination of evidence of criminality against Maduro from his former head of security, from other drug dealers, then additional evidence from within. Of course, America would have preferred a regime change to evolve on its own by Venezuelans. Maduro was very arrogant in the press. He was criticizing Trump. Trump's actions with the embargo should have been the catalyst to reason. Maduro was also given escape plans where he could have abdicated and walked away. Trump gave him that olive branch, and he refused. So he's kind of dug his own grave here. But getting back to the aspect of legality, he is a narco trafficker that's not recognized by Europe as the leader of the country. Now, the only thing that was lacking here was an ICC court injunction or action against him, much like Mr. Putin has in Russia. He can't travel to other countries without special diplomatic waivers being given, otherwise he'd be arrested. Ironically, America does not recognize the ICC, but it recognizes itself as the global police department, so to speak. So again, they're not going to ask for permission. If they're wrong, they'll beg for forgiveness, but then America doesn't usually apologize if it doesn't have to. I think they have an overwhelming bit of evidence against Maduro. And face it, an abduction of this type doesn't happen by itself. There are factors on the ground that assisted the U.S. military to conduct this extraction as flawlessly as they did. Sure, they took out some targets in Venezuela first. They took out the Air Force Base at El Libertador, which was the conduit for both unmanned and manned aircraft, surveillance, and radar. That they had to do to protect the U.S. forces, the Delta forces that came in for the extraction. So that's where you hear about the bombings in Caracas. They did not hit any civilian targets. If they did, it will be collateral damage, which I'm sure we're going to hear about in the coming days. There's a press release coming up in another 7 minutes in Mar-a-Lago. But that'll be President Trump's version of what happened. And it'll obviously favor any actions America has taken. And then the rest of the critique will fall into place from other countries, especially Russia, China. For the next week, that's all the newspapers are going to be talking about.
Now, Alexander, I'd like to know what does this development say about the effectiveness and the authority of United Nations and other multilateral institutions?
Well, I'll give you an African example. Rwanda, the genocide. What did the UN do? It sat back and watched the merciless killing of innocent civilians. It wasn't allowed to react unless they were shot at. If that's the type of policing we need or we want, I would question that. So as far as how the UN has evolved, its principles and its mandates have all been good. However, its inability to act as of the last many years are in question. And Trump has challenged them, and he's defunded them because he feels they're an inadequate force. US aid, which ran in parallel with the UN, he's also defunded that. I can see similar actions taking place in Africa with illegitimate elections, ones that are deemed loaded or faulty, especially where standing leaders arrest all members of the opposition. We've got a situation in Tanzania right now. They're reaching out for support to other East African countries, namely Uganda and Kenya, which have possible similar votership issues coming up in the new year. So if we compare what precedents this is setting and how it can affect other nations, I think it's major, and I think we have to be very careful here. But I don't think you can compare apples to apples here. Each country, each situation is a separate application. And you really need to know and study the demographics, the cultural, the religious, the military, the autocratic or the democratic applications for that area. Sometimes it takes an autocrat to get things done. We call them in the West, we call them dictators, but not all dictators are bad. Case in point, the United Emirates, Dubai is one of the most peaceful cities in the world. Qatar, Saudi Arabia, they're all autocratic, yet they're peaceful. Trump has acknowledged that when he made the deal with them last year. And he's clearly said, we're not here to occupy or invade. We're here, even by military action, to be the catalyst to peace. So sometimes you've got to get a little tough to result in peace. But his attitude is the end justifies the means, breaking rules or not.
Let me come back to you now, Yemi. Looking at allegations of drug trafficking and national security threats, are these accusations, do they legally justify the cross-border military action of this scale?
Yeah, the U.S. government is accused Maduro of narcotic operation.
Yes.
It will be up to them to prove that. I'm aware now they want to do the trial in New York. So it will be up to them to prove the link between Maduro's narcotic operation and what happens in U.S. soil. So that's a legal terrain. Why I'm questioning that narrative is that the last few hours here, we've seen the Trump administration making statements saying the U.S. is going to be involved. U.S. is going to be actively involved in Venezuela oil industry. Now, that's a very big statement. And that clearly suggests that maybe the motivation here is oil after all, nothing to do with narcotics. So if it's narcotics, time will tell. They will definitely need to prove the link between the Maduro administration and how the narcotic operation actually lands on U.S. soil. But as it stands now, with the rhetoric coming from the Trump administration, it's going more towards as such that what they're after is control of oil and energy. Now, let's be clear here, the Maduro regime, majority of the Venezuelans don't like the regime. There's widespread poverty. The regime represses a lot of the citizens. But when we're moving towards this kind of regime change, we could be sleepwalking into Libya or Iraq situation. Because history clearly says that quite a lot of regime changes situation don't end well. The only situation of regime change that is fairly ended well for now is Syria. So apart from that, we've not seen any clear case study where these things end up well. We're already seeing the fact that Colombia in the last few hours now have said that they're preparing for influx of refugees from Venezuela. So these things could grow arms and legs as we go on. But only maybe in coming weeks, we will be able to see a better picture. But in terms of narcotic operation, it's up to the U.S. administration to prove that. And when it comes to, if they're going to be tried in the U.S. courts, there will be a fair trial, the jury may be involved, and time will tell. how things will play out.
Now that you mentioned Colombia, I'm really interested in that region now. And I'm just asking, what are the likely diplomatic, or should I say security consequences for Latin America and the wider global system, Yemi?
Yeah, Latin America itself is quite divided here. So we have the right-wing government in Argentina, Chile. They kind of support what Trump has done so far. But we have the government in Colombia that is not supporting it. Now, Colombia and Venezuela share borders, about 2,000-kilometer border, and Colombia has already deployed its forces to monitor that and maintain peace in that border region. So there's a cocktail of things here in the Latin American space, where we have some governments that think they're for Trump, and Colombia government, for example, they're against what's going on. So there's a lot of complexities, a lot of uncertainties, I would say now. But Latin America, I would say, as a whole, will be bracing up for possible maybe refugee influx, because we need to understand that most of the security apparatus that supports Maduro, they're still intact. The Chavista ideology is still very much intact in Venezuela. So we don't know if there's going to be elections that will be held. We don't know the plans the Trump administration have towards securing peace and prosperity for Venezuela as a whole. So there's a lot of things we don't know yet. And I'm hoping the next few hours from press conference from the Trump team will shed more clarity to these things.
Well, let me come back to you, Alexander. Does this reinforce concerns about selective application of international norms by powerful states?
Well, again, as I mentioned earlier, it's going to vary country to country. You mentioned Colombia. My colleague mentioned Colombia a minute ago.
Yeah.
Petro, the president of Colombia, was in fact the former leader of the FARC, which was a revolutionary group that fought the Colombian government for years. The fact that he got elected as president was a surprise to many, and he's not very popular right now. In fact, he's on his way out early in the new year. There are suspicions that he was aligned with the Maduro camp, and that much of his campaign funds came through the Maduro camp. I'm sure evidence of this may surface, and who knows, maybe something will happen in Colombia. I think what's happening in Venezuela is a lesson to other surrounding countries that where the leaders are of questionable integrity. I think if under the Machiavellian rules, for a coup to take a country over, it's because the leadership was not giving to the people. The people didn't respect, or they hated the leadership. If people live in fear, that's okay, but if they hate the leader, that's bad. But the leader also has to give back to the people. In the case of autocratic countries, call them benevolent oppressors. If they're giving back to the people and they're keeping the peace and they're fighting off insurgencies in the country and they're giving the people a better life, they're going to stay in control. Look at what's happening in Burkina Faso. Time is yet to tell with Captain Traore, but he seems to have the integrity needed for an autocratic leader for his people. I'm watching that situation carefully, and I'm not in criticism of it. Hopefully he'll be able to make peace with ECOWAS. But again, international rules dictate because he's a coup leader, they can't recognize him. So he's left out there alone, and he's had to make deals with outside nations such as Russia to bring them in for help. It would have been better for the African Union to do such. It would have been better for the UN to do such. But it just doesn't happen in this world. Trump is showing backbone here. This problem did not happen yesterday or 2 years ago or 4 years ago. It's been going on for a long time. And I think, we talk about oil as being part of the deal. I think that deal's already been cut with Machado. winning the Nobel Prize on behalf of Trump. I think she's going to allow American interests to come in, exploit the oil fields, but the money's going to go back to the people in a way that hasn't happened in the past. We'll see how that plays out, because time tells all. Unfortunately, in this world, human nature dictates that power corrupts, and ultimate power corrupts ultimately. And when leaders come in with the best of intentions and integrity, sometimes they have to make a deal with the devil, and suddenly everything goes to hell.
Now, Alexander, I'd like to know, how might this reshape future diplomatic engagement, say, between major powers and smaller states?
Depending on who the major power is. Again, America's been very careful here. They're playing a huge game of chess. They don't just break the rules. I think they bend them. They create a situation such as narco-terrorism to attack the leader. They established that the elections in the country were illegitimate, so therefore they're not recognizing the leader as the true leader. If that's the case, then he's not the de facto president of the country, which one would think he would bestow all the diplomatic immunities on him that he should have. So that's the case in Venezuela. If this happens in other countries, I would say they're going to be open to the same type of criticism and the same type of intervention. It all depends how much of a global footprint they have. Maybe if they have oil, or if they're a strategic country of position that other interests would want to take advantage of, or at least make an investment in. We've got a similar case in Somaliland right now with the endorsement of statehood from Israel. What's the motives behind that? Now, there's no war going on. There's no accusations of criminality or harboring fugitives or extremists. It's a peaceful situation. I think that's where you're going to see an evolution that's quite different from Venezuela. Nigeria has its own conflicts right now. America's come in and given a warning, although I think, unlike Maduro, Tinubu has reacted properly and strategically with America, protecting Nigeria's sovereignty. How that plays out in the next coming weeks with ongoing joint military operations with the Nigerian forces and American, we'll see the actual integrity behind America's actions, if they are of integrity or if they are of other selfish wants and desires. I'm an optimist, and I'm hoping it'll work out for the best for both Nigeria and Africa as a whole.
All right, just before I let you gentlemen go, let me ask you, Yemi, quickly, if force replaces diplomacy in resolving political disputes, what implications, does this have for global peace and stability?
Well, I think in terms of implication, that's going to be going towards not trusting America as a whole. So there's going to be these seeds of distrust going on when it comes to negotiation. We need to also remember that it's activities like this is what makes states like Iran always want the nuclear weapons. So you're going to be having some despotic states thinking about securing themselves in future, not now. They're going to be thinking behind the scenes about maybe making moves to, at all costs, acquire nuclear weapons to deter the US, things like this from happening to them. So that's why I'm always an advocate of being very careful when it comes to a state like the US, a powerful state, just suddenly going into another sovereign state. I mean, we can decide, we can agree that the Maduro regime, it's a brutal one, a repressive one. We can agree that the election Maduro conducted in 2024 wasn't a credible one. But to cross the line of actually kidnapping an head of state like this, I think is going to open the Pandora box. We're going to be seeing states maybe even dashing towards nuclear weapons. we're going to be seeing negotiations, being cautious in negotiation between the Western world and the rest of the world, especially along the Middle East and Latin America now. So it's a bit of a dicey situation going forward in terms of negotiation. It's going to be sowing the seeds of distrust.
All right, Alexander, before I let you go, I'm going to ask you a similar question. If force replaces diplomacy in resolving political disputes, what are the implications when it comes to global peace and stability?
Well, that's why we have wars. You know, I agree with my colleague, but in terms of nuclear proliferation in junior countries, I don't see that happening at all. None of the nuclear powers are going to give away nuclear weapons. Iran is a good case in point. They had the brain power to try and develop their own nuclear base because they had nuclear power plants. Well, we all saw what happened to them in the last mass bombings in Iran. Again, that is a separate situation which you can't compare to Venezuela and you can't compare to anywhere in Africa. So nuclear proliferation is always something that concerns all of us, but I don't think it's going to be awarded to any small party country in the future. That would be really irresponsible.
All right, thank you, gentlemen, for having this conversation with us.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
All right, in case you missed it, a lot's been happening between the U.S. and Venezuela as we speak. United States have captured President Nicolas Maduro of Venezuela. President Trump is expected to make an official statement as regards this new development. We'll keep you posted, of course, bringing you all the updates and let you in on all that's happening across the world. My name is Chiwete Onyema. Right now, it's back to regular programming.